Hello, my name is Henry Kerrey, and I'd like to introduce the next senator from the great state Nebraska, Bob Kerrey.
Work for me. Way to go, Henry. That was a great speech, I thought. Nobody's ever complained about a speech being too short, Henry. That's a very good beginning. Look, I've actually written a fair amount that I'd like to try to work my way through, mostly because my campaign manager, Paul Johnson's worried about what I might say if I go off script. So, but let me begin by saying this is a part of a very, very nice homecoming that I've gotten from the people of the state of Nebraska. This is the place I was born. This is the place where I grew up, where I started in business. This is where I volunteered for the Navy. So many things have happened here. And it really is, for me, the second most important homecoming I've ever gotten. My first was 1969 when I came home from the hospital. My family was here. My friends were there. There was a church group that was there for me. Most importantly, I am quite passionate about it. Most importantly, I went to a hospital that we call the VA hospital in Lincoln and Omaha. And under federal law, I was covered. I went there. I still actually have a claim on all your incomes as a consequence of being service-connected disabled. And it's quite comforting. Without your health, you're not really free. Without your health, you really don't have the kind of liberty that good health can bring to you. And the men and women who were in that hospital, and there were many volunteers that came from veteran service organizations as well, but the men and women at a hospital, the doctors, the nurses, the medical technicians, the maintenance people, they all work for the government. And I am not an advocate of having the government run everything, but I certainly will be a defender that it can save your life when the bottom drops out in your life, because it did to me when I came home. And so I will talk about it in this campaign, because health care is apt to be an enormously important issue. But among the things I will say to Nebraskans is never second guess your values, because the values of patriotism, of faith, of family, of community, of hard work, of taking care of one another, of welcoming people. All you have to do is talk to somebody who's come to Nebraska, who's moved here, and they'll tell you how generous and friendly their neighbors have been. All you have to do is talk to somebody who's come here, let's say, to watch the Colorado football team play Nebraska in Memorial Stadium, and they will say to you that Nebraska football fans are the best. Because politeness is our value. Rudeness is not a value of the people of the state of Nebraska. And no one, even people who have said to me, I've never voted for you and I'm not going to vote for you in this election, haven't been rude about it. Well, one or two have been, but for the most part, all I've gotten is an expression of the values of this state. And I do get asked a fair amount by people who say, well, hasn't Nebraska changed a lot? The party registration and people's opinions and so forth. And I know that that becomes important in a campaign. But before you get your opinions on matters, before you decide what your voter registration is going to be, the question really is, what kind of values do you have? And those values haven't changed. They really haven't. And we're far more welcoming than the ads that are being run against me would seem to indicate. And we do have to think of ourselves that way. Think of ourselves as welcoming people. Think of ourselves as inclusive people, because that's our value. We want all of us to be a part of this great state. We want all of us to be a part of our community. And there are times when we don't. And it's not so bad every now and then to fall off a course. But for the most part, we are welcoming. For the most part, we all are inclusive. For the most part, we try to allow people who are visiting us, who have come here to work, to feel at home. I'm a candidate for the United States Senate for a reason that's actually connected to another value, which is duty. I simply could not sit on the sidelines looking at the troubles that this country faces without becoming a candidate for the United States Senate one more time. I am a Democrat, and I'm a Democrat in large part because I believe in social and economic justice. And it's not perfect. It's not... It's not possible for us to achieve perfection, but to desire to achieve perfection, to desire to try to make our laws more socially and economically just, is a good desire. It's a good thing, again, for us to try to do. It's very much connected to our values. Don't let anybody tell you that somehow we're not mainstream because we care about economic and social justice. It is connected, in my view, to the most important values of this state. But I also happen to believe that the major problems this country faces are not going to get solved unless we can break out of the partisan gridlock, unless we can break out of these caucuses that have made it exceptionally difficult for Republicans and Democrats to get together on the most contentious issues of the day. So first and foremost, I do promise not to be beholden to any caucus. In my case, I'll caucus for the Democrats. But I will serve what's in the best interest of the state of Nebraska. I will serve what's best in the interest of the United States of America, not the Democratic caucus, but what's in the best interest of the people of this state and the people of this country. In spite of the terrible suffering of the last 3 or 4 years that occurred, the financial meltdown of 2008 was a self-inflicted meltdown. It was self-inflicted as a consequence of greed, as a consequence of what I call crony capitalism, as a consequence of terrible regulation, and it inflicted almost unimaginable damage to families and individuals in our country. You think of the damage. I mean, I've looked at the numbers and I've talked to people who have lost their pensions, people who have lost their entire life savings, people who still are unemployed and can't find work, people whose mortgages are larger than the value of their homes, people who thought that home was going to be their biggest part of the American dream. A terrible amount of damage it was done, most importantly, the hope that people have that somehow democracy will lift the standard of their living and the standard of the living of their children as well. But we're struggling back, it seems to me. Americans are making an effort to fight back and try to get out of this hole. I think it's terrible. It would be a terrible mistake for us to forget how we got in this mess and go back to the good old days of saying basically we're not going to regulate the financial industries, that you don't have to worry about them, they're always going to do the right thing. They didn't do the right thing. They did the wrong thing, and millions of Americans suffered as a consequence. So I'm running, first of all, to bring the values of Nebraska back to Washington, D.C., where I think that they're needed. And perhaps most importantly of all the values, it was the value of our most famous senator, a Republican, George W. Norris, who came back to Nebraska after 2 terms very disillusioned from the Senate. And we know very well that among the things that he did was to come back and get our Constitution amendment, so we have only a single house in the Nebraska legislature. I'm not going to propose that we abolish the House of Representatives, but yet, I may be proposing to change some of the representation, but I'm not going to propose that we abolish the House. But Norris did a second thing. Norris said that the Democrat and Republican caucus in the first part of the 20th century were a problem. And he got us to amend our Constitution so there are no caucuses in the Nebraska legislature. I came into office in 1983 and we were in a deficit. And I worked with the legislature to cut spending from year 1 to year 2. We set up a rainy day fund. We have professional forecasting of revenue. We've got the legislature, rather than a partisan board of equalization, setting our tax rates, and a number of other reforms as well. And we still invested in our people, in education and transportation and infrastructure. I don't believe it would have been possible to get it done if I had to work through either a Democrat or Republican caucus. I think it would have been exceptionally difficult to get it done. I think it would have been very, very difficult for the legislature to come to terms with trying to provide prenatal support for the children of people here without documentation. It was a phenomenal accomplishment of a nonpartisan legislature to override the veto of a governor who, in this case, was absolutely wrong.